started a series last week called The New Possible. Say that with me, the new possible. You know, why do we need a new possible? Well, because many of us, for all of our lives, have been told so many things were impossible. So many things would never happen. Many of us were told, you'll never get a good education. That's impossible. Many were told, you'll never go to school. You'll never make anything of your life. That's impossible. Many of us were told, you'll never be a success in life. Look at you. That's impossible. Well, today, we are looking at the new possible. For a child of God, there is a new possible. Say that with me again. New possible. Now, if you recall last week, we were looking at the story of Peter walking on water. And we said that was the basis of our new possible because he was doing something that no human being had ever done before. No one had ever walked on water before. And here was Peter walking on water. So what we're going to do, we're going to pick up in the same story this week. And, you know, it was brought to my attention. Someone said, well, you know what, Pastor? I've never heard anyone preach more than one sermon on Peter walking on water, because usually it's the storm, and Peter gets out the boat, he walks towards Jesus, he sinks, Jesus grabs him up, and the moral of the story is keep your eyes on Jesus and everybody go home. Well, you know, there's so much more there. There's so much more there. You know, as we mature in the things of the Lord, as we grow and as we grow in our knowledge of the Word, and as the Spirit begins to stir up just new, fresh things in us, we're finding that the same scriptures that we've been reading for years sometimes have fresh revelation in it. So I want to, as I said, go back to this story again. You know, I always like to savor something. I always like to get all I can out of something. When you were a kid, did you ever have one of those orange squeezers with the big chrome handle that you put the half of the orange in and you pull it down? And really? Oh, okay. No. The reason I'm saying that is because, okay, they made orange juice, but then you got a little glass of orange juice, you drank it, and that was it. I never liked those things. I would like to slice the orange, and I just like to just chew on it, and get everything out of it, because there was more to it than just that juice. Now, there's more to this story than just Peter sinking and God pulling him out. So we're going to go back there today, and we're going to look at another segment of it, and we're going to ask Spirit to really open up our understanding to what's going on here. So I'm going to go back to Matthew chapter 14. We're going to read verses 24 through verses 32. And I'm reading from the New King James Version, but your translation may be a little bit different. And it says this: "But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, 'It is a ghost.' And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, 'Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid.'" Now let me stop right there, because it's very important that we understand that the literal translation of what Jesus said was not so much, was here, it was this. What he was saying was, be bold, be brave, don't be afraid, I am. Be bold, be brave, don't be afraid, I am. And we know every time that Jesus uses that word I am, he is talking about the self-identifying God who identified himself in Exodus as I am. So here he says that again. And in verse 28, Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you," and again, last week we found out that what Peter was really saying was, "Lord, because it is you. Lord, because it is I am. Lord, because it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid and began to sink. He cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Now, what I want us to do today is to look at that one portion of the story, but we want to look at it in the greater context. Well, Pastor Frank, what do you mean by the greater context? We want to look at this picture that we have of this boat being tossed around on the sea with 12 disciples in it holding on to the rails, Jesus walking up to that boat and having one of the disciples recognize him, step at his command, okay, because he bid him to come, at his command to step out of that boat on the water. Leave that picture in your mind, because the greater context that we're talking about, that this picture is seen is the incarnation. The greater context that we need to look at it in today is the incarnation. Pastor Frank, why do you talk so much about the incarnation? Because it is the greatest thing that ever happened in the universe. John says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. God himself became this stuff. He became flesh. He became one of us. He became a vulnerable little baby. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, lived among us, became one of us, walked the same paths that we walked, saw the same trouble that you and I saw. He became one of us. He became one of us so that we could become in union with him. You see, God himself came down and gave himself to us to bring us into union with him. And in union with him, that changed everything. No longer was there a God up there someplace in the sky that might or may not care about us. When Jesus came down and became a human and joined himself to our humanity, he became one of us, 100% human and 100% God at the same time. That had never happened. There's no religion anywhere that can say that their God came down and became one of them. Jesus was the only one. That's why the incarnation is such a big deal. Jesus is a genuine, authentic human, but also God the Son. Love coming to us to bring us into union with himself. And that's the final definition of love. You hear what I said? That is the final definition of love. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. God himself came and gave himself to us by actually, authentically joining us in our humanity. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. Ponder it for a while. Ponder it for a while. The God of the universe, the one that hung the stars in place, the one in Colossians that says that everything was made to, through, by, and for. The one that John said in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. That God came down and became a vulnerable baby for us, not because he had to, for us, for our salvation, to save us. He came down to rescue us. There's no other way that we could have had union with him had that not happened. And I want you to know that he did this for love. He didn't come down here because he didn't have anything better to do. He didn't come down because he wanted some social experiment to see how those humans were doing. He came down here for love. And that's that word agape. And please, you know, people hear love and immediately they get the wrong idea. You know, they say, well, you know, Pastor Frank, he always talks about grace and love. But, you know, but see, in their minds, grace and love is this, you know, this fluttering in your stomach when you see somebody you like. You know, that's a feeling, but that's not love. That's not agape. Let me tell you something about agape. Agape is the unbounded, listen to me, folks, unbounded, unlimited passion of Father, Son, and Spirit. There's nothing woozy about that. I'm talking about unlimited passion. This is the raw passion of God to save us, to draw us into union with himself, Father, Son, and Spirit. It's the movement of his tri-personal, joyous energy to reunite us to him. That's what true agape is. That's what love really is. You know, I've heard people say, well, love isn't what you think it is. God's love is giving you what you need and not what you... That's not love. That's not agape. Agape is God's passionate love for you individually. He loved you so much individually that he came here for you, to rescue you personally. As I said last week, it's easy to believe that God so loved the world, but it's really hard for many of us to believe that God so loved me. I want you to say something. For God so loved me. Boy, your timing is totally off. Let's try this again. For God so loved me that he gave his only son. That's better. He loved you individually. See, that's love. That's love. He didn't have to do that. The universe was created because of love. Do you understand that? That raw energy, that raw passion of God is what hung the stars in place. That raw passion of let there be light is what brought light into being. That was pure, raw love. And what we see here in this picture we're talking about, we see the love of God inviting Peter to come and unite with him. So we need to ask the question, well, what is happening here? You've got the picture, we see this picture, but what really is happening here? Well, this was part of a series of lessons in which the student became as the teacher. If you recall last week, we said that when a teacher would instruct someone, when they called you rabbi, it had nothing to do with tests that you were being written out. It had to do with you becoming as that teacher. If someone was teaching you how, if your Rabboni was teaching you how to make tents, at the end of your time with your Rabboni, you could make tents just like he could. That was the goal of a teacher. Not to tell someone about you, but to prepare them to literally be you. So this was Jesus. At his initiative, they participated in his abilities. He's the source of life in Christ, the ability in the human. Now, throughout the Gospels, Jesus taught the disciples how they were to be as he was. He wasn't teaching them to try to be like Jesus. He was teaching them and showing them, I want you to do the things that you see me doing. Oh, but Pastor Frank, that sounds right. Well, it's right here in the Bible, and that's how he was teaching. He wasn't teaching them to be nice people. He was teaching them to be as he was. That was the goal of teaching at that time. You see, he was teaching them all that in anticipation of the Holy Spirit. If you recall, when this story happened, the Spirit had not yet been given. But if you will recall, he had sent them out in pairs. Do you remember that? And what did he do? He gave them his authority, and he gave them his power to go out. And when they came back, what did they say? They said, Lord, wow. I mean, we went out and we laid our hands on people just like you do, and they got healed. You know, we spoke to demons just like you did, and they flee. See, because it wasn't a different kind of authority. It was his authority. It's important that you understand that. He was doing it with his authority. The Spirit would come inside of us and impart God's abilities to us. That's the beauty of being post-resurrection. You see, when the Spirit came, he imparted into us himself. And he imparted us the abilities of Jesus inside of us. Child of God, if you don't hear anything else, hear this. The purpose, one of the purpose of the Spirit coming was not so much that you'd have a nice life and you'd have an abundance of money and you'd have insight into people. All those things happen, but the purpose was that the Spirit would come inside of you and impart the abilities of God in you. And don't be shocked, to impart the abilities of God in you. Not like abilities, but the same abilities in you. So do you know what that means? You know what the implication of what I just said is? Because if you really knew it, you would fall off of your seat. The implication is that Jesus' purpose was that you would do the same things that he did. Yes, that you would do the same things that Jesus would do. Well, Pastor Frank, where did you get that from? Well, let me ask you a question. Just before this, we talked about what? The feeding of the 5,000? Okay, so what did Jesus do? He took the 7 loaves and he took the fish, and what did he do with them? He gave them to the disciples. Now, when the disciples gave out the loaves and they gave out the fish, were they giving out full loaves of bread? Were they giving out full fish? Yes, they were. Do you understand? Jesus didn't say to them, well, you know what, I'm gonna do a miracle here, but I'm going to let you feed the people, but I'm going to give you a loaf, but you're just going to be able to give people dinner rolls. Here, give them a dinner roll here. Give them a No. You see, when Peter and the disciples pulled from that loaf and gave to someone, it was another full loaf for them to give. They were doing the same thing. You understand? The purpose of Jesus doing that, he was showing them to do the same exact thing that he was doing, not with a different power, but with his same power. You see, that's the purpose of the Spirit. That's the beauty of the Spirit, because when God's Spirit came inside of us, he gave us abilities of God. Well, John talks about it in the first letter of John. 1 John 4:17, he says, as he is, so are we in this world. Do you hear that? It says, as he is, present tense. Where is Jesus? Present tense. He's seated at the right hand of the Father right now. As he is, so are we in this world. Do you understand what I'm saying? Not when you die and go to heaven. He said, so are we in this world. That makes all the difference, folks. When you look around you, I know when I look around me, I see a world in turmoil. I see crazy stuff all around me. I hear people say, oh, I wish I would have been born in a different time. Let me tell you something. You're living in the best times in the world. There's going to be a move of the Spirit in this world like nothing else. You are going to find out who you really are. Your authentic identity is going to be revealed. And let me tell you, the Spirit is going to just birth something in you, life in you, and it's going to break out all over. The reason we're in a world like this during this time is because we're the ones that's going to make the difference. We're here to make the difference. We're not here to sit down and look at CNN and say, oh, how bad the world is. Oh, it's getting worse. Oh, well, you know what? When we find out our real, genuine identity, let me tell you something. This world will be turned upside down. Look, 12 fishermen turned the world upside down. That's what it says. When they figured out who they were and they started doing the things that Jesus had imparted unto them, and the Spirit came and they were able to do it in his fullness, the world was turned upside down. People were saying, oh man, don't let those guys come over here. Every place they go, they turn the world upside down. But we live in a world that needs to be turned upside down or right side up. You see, this picture that we're looking at, Peter walking on water, doing something that no human had done before, this was supposed to be a lesson in the new possible. And the only one who seemed to get it was Peter. Because if you recall last week, the disciples thought Jesus was a ghost, and they cried out in fear. And they missed it. They missed the whole point of why they were out there. You know, Mark's gospel gives us more insight as to why they missed it. So, you know, in Mark chapter 6, I'm going to read verse 52 and 53. Listen to this. This is the same account. And it says, verse 51, then he, speaking of Jesus, got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped. And they were utterly astonished, for they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their hearts had been hardened. So what Mark is saying is this. They didn't gain any insight from the loaves and the fish. Well, what insight was he talking about? He was talking about Jesus trying to teach them that the purpose of him using them in this great miracle was because he wanted them to know that they were able to use the same abilities that he had. But the Bible says they didn't get any insight in that. They didn't get it. The word that they used there to say that they didn't get it is, and here comes your Greek lesson, was uk sonumi. Say uk sonumi. Now, what that means is this. Sunumi means not able to put things together. It's like a puzzle, and you look at the pieces all over there, but you can't put the pieces together. I'm sorry. Sunumi means to be able to put the pieces together. To put the pieces together. That means to look at something and say, oh, okay, yes, I understand this now. But uk means not. So uk sunumi means they were not able to put the pieces together. They didn't get it. They were part of a great miracle themselves, but they didn't understand what was going on, because when they looked up and saw Jesus, they saw a ghost. It's pretty interesting. Their response to Jesus, now think about this, 2 chapters earlier, what did they say? They said, you know, the demons, they fled from us, and they cried, and they were fearful of us. But here they are, 2 chapters later, the very same ones that wrought those miracles, and what are they doing? They are fearful of Jesus. You get it? They're like, he's a ghost. 2 chapters later. So those 11 didn't get it. But I think that Peter got it. I think that Peter kind of understood what was going on. They didn't understand that this was a continuation of a lesson of sharing in the same abilities. And that's when Jesus turned and said to them, be bold. Be brave. Don't be afraid. I am. And I think Peter got it. I think that Peter said, you know, I knew it was something going on with those loaves and fishes, because that's the first, I saw the loaves multiply in my own human hands, but I know it wasn't my ability. I know it was him allowing those abilities to now work in me. And he said, I am, if that's you. He didn't say if, I'm sorry. He said, I am because that's you. He said, command me to come out there on the water with you. See, Peter realized something. He says, this is about us having the same abilities and sharing the same abilities as Jesus. So, I am, because it's you, command me to come to you on the water. And it's a very interesting point here. And the point is this. Peter didn't say to Jesus, Lord, if it's your will, I want to come to you. Peter said, Lord, here's my will. I want to walk on the water. And Jesus said, come. You know what that tells me? What you want is important. What you want is important to Jesus. You know, I talk to people and I said, well, what do you want in your Christian life? And they say, well, whatever God wants for me. Okay, that's a good answer, but you know, we talked about this some weeks ago when Jesus said to the blind, he says, what do you want? think about what it is you want. Think about what it is that God has put a burning desire in your heart for. Think about what it is that keeps coming up in your mind, and you're realizing, you know what? This is birthed in God. But God, I want to do this because he's interested in what you want. You want to start a cooking class at night? Guess what? You know what? Jesus is interested in that. Maybe he's the one that birthed the idea in your mind. Do you understand what I'm saying? Jesus isn't against cooking classes. Maybe you want to step out and start your own business. And you're saying, is this the will of God? Well, Jesus is saying, well, what do you want? What is it you want? What do you want to do? Here's a wide open field. Here's a wide open field of new possibilities. These are brand new possibilities. What is it you want? I'm here. I'm with you. We're in this together. What do you want? We got to get out of that. We got to get out of the boat. We got to get to the place that we can say, you know what? I know it's safe in the boat, like the 11 disciples. I mean, I feel safe here in the boat. But Jesus is calling me out of the boat. I'd like to get out of the boat. Well, don't like to get out of the boat. Get out of the boat. Get out of the boat. So he said to Peter, come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Now listen. Peter was not imitating Jesus. Did you hear what I said? Peter was not imitating Jesus when he got down out of the boat and stepped on the water. You see, when you imitate someone, you try to emulate them. When I was a young kid, my sister and I, when my parents were there, we take the 4 chairs from the dining room and we sit them together like a car, and we sit in the front seat and the back seat, and we sit there and we go like this, and we were imitating what our parents did. We were pretending that we were driving, and we would say the things that they would say. You made a wrong turn over there. Look, let me drive. That kind of stuff. But we weren't, you see, we were imitating them. It wasn't a real car. Do you understand? We couldn't do what they were doing because we were imitating them. Peter was not imitating Jesus when he stepped out of the boat. He needed the same abilities that was holding up Jesus to hold him up. That was the only thing that was going to hold him up. When he stepped out of that boat, it was because Jesus said, come. And when Jesus said, come, he realized he's imparting his abilities into me. The very same thing he's doing, I can do it because he just commanded me to do it. I wanted to do it. He's given me permission, and he stepped out of the boat. And when he stepped out of the boat, he stepped out on something solid that held him up. This really happened, folks. He stepped on, this is not a fairy tale. He stepped on something solid that held him up. He wasn't trying to imitate Jesus. He was simultaneously walking in the same ability that Jesus had. Do you understand? Jesus' abilities were flowing out of him and into Peter to the point that Peter could do the exact same thing that Peter could do the exact same thing that Jesus were doing. It goes on to say that when he stepped out of the boat, he began to sink. And when he began to sink, it says that he was afraid. He was afraid because his perspective got skewed at some point. When he had his thoughts aligned with the thoughts of Jesus, when he had himself lined up with what Jesus was doing and the perspective of Jesus, you could say that he assumed Jesus' perspective, or you could say that he aligned his trust with Jesus' abilities. Let's talk about aligning your trust with Jesus' ability. Child of God, have you ever thought about what it would be like To line up your trust with the abilities of God. To say to God, I know that it looks like it's impossible that I'll ever go to this school and finish it, but you've got the ability. You've got the ability to make that happen. I want to line up my trust with your ability. Because that's what Peter did. That's what Peter did. He lined up his trust with Jesus' ability. And Jesus, he was all for it. He was delighted. He said, come. What do you want? Come. This isn't a closed shop here. Come. This is what I want you to do. This is what I'm training you to do. I'm sorry that you're the only one that got it and the other 11 are still holding on to the boat. I wanted all of them to come out. But yes, come. Lining up your trust with his abilities. Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 12, most assuredly I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, listen carefully, he will also do. And greater works than these he will do because I go to my Father. Greater works than walking on water. What could be greater works than walking on water? Well, try this one. Love one another as I have loved you. Can you do it? You can't do it in your ability. I couldn't do it in my ability. But I want you to know that what's impossible for men is possible with God. So you want to talk about impossibilities and things that you can't do? Love one another as I have loved you. It says, but when he saw that the wind was boisterous, that means that at that point the waves were really kicking up, and he didn't see the wind. You can't see the wind. You can see the effects of the wind. But he was looking at the foam coming off the top of the waves, and it was splashing on his face. And now, even though he was aligned with Jesus, Jesus' abilities were flowing in and through him. Do you understand? They were flowing through him. That's how Jesus reaches people. That's how Jesus reaches the world, by his abilities flowing through us and touching other people. This precious couple here, they go to the slums all over India. You know what happens? The abilities of Jesus flows through them and touches people and changes people's lives. Do you understand that? He wants to use all of us like that. That was what was happening with the fish and the loaves. Jesus figured out real quick, there's no way that I'm going to feed all these 15,000 people. You guys, do this. Here are the loaves. Now go ahead. And what happened? His ability flowed through them, and it met a need. There was a need of hunger. 15,000 people needed to be fed, and Jesus was able to do it through his disciples, but with his abilities. Greater works will you do than these. Jesus said this. That means everything that you see me doing, there's greater things that you can do because I go to my Father. And when I go to my Father, he will send the Spirit. And when the Spirit comes, the Spirit will come in you and impart in you the very abilities of God himself. So he began to sink, and he was afraid. There's that great word, fear. You see, fear crept in. Fear arises when we're not resting in God's love. Please hear that. Fear arises when we're not resting in God's love. If you ever want to sleep or rest or trust peacefully, all you have to do is to rest. It's not hard to trust because trust is resting. All you have to do is rest. When you're not resting in God's love, you leave a wide opening for fear to come in. So he was afraid and he began to sink. You see, here's what happened. He began to compare Jesus' perspective Because Jesus had already said, come, you can walk on water. I'm imparting my abilities into you. You can walk on water. He was comparing Jesus' perspective to his own experience as a sailor. You know what he was doing? See, he was an experienced sailor. He had great respect for the sea. You know why? He probably seen people get drowned. He probably knew that if you step out on the water, you're probably going to get drowned. So he had great respect for the sea, but here's what happened. Even though he had himself aligned with Jesus' ability, his mind began to kick in and say, wait a minute. I'm walking on water. You can't walk on. You see, as soon as his mind challenged him, it got him out of alignment with what Jesus was doing and in alignment with the sea. So you could say that he put his faith in the waves to do what he knows they've done all his life. Or he began to think about what he was doing. Who ever learned how to ride a bike? You ever learn how to ride a bike? Who ever learned how to swim? So what's the first thing that you figure out? Don't think about it. You know, if you think about everything they tell you while to swim, put this hand forward, kick these feet, turn this way, spit the water out, fix this. If you think about that, then you're going to sink. But if you just jump in the water and do it, you'll swim like a fish. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're trying to ride a bike. Okay, now when you go to the left, cut the wheel to the left. When you go to the right, cut the wheel to the right. Now look straight ahead and make sure. Now pedal. Now when you want to stop, you see, if you think about that, you'll never ride the bike. But if you just jump on it and start pedaling, you'll ride the bike. Don't think about it. Do you understand what I'm saying? You don't have to think about aligning yourself with the abilities of God. Don't think about it, just do it. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him. Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Now, please understand, Jesus wasn't mad at him. He was probably delighted that at least one of them got it. But he said, oh, you of little faith, why do you doubt? Well, what's that mean, little faith? It means faith with gaps in it where alternate possibilities are entertained. You see, Peter had the faith. You don't have to think about that. Peter had the faith. It was the most natural thing in the world. And listen to me, folks. Trusting God is the easiest thing in the world for a child of God. Because it's just resting in everything that he says that you are. It's resting in his ability. It should be your default setting. It's when you start thinking that you get out of that. Do you understand what I'm saying? So little faith means faith with gaps in it where alternate possibilities are entertained. Or faith that hesitates and has second thoughts. Let me just say this. If you're going to have second thoughts about something, don't do it at all. Don't do it at all. Because as soon as you have a second thought about it, guess what creeps in? Doubt. That's what creeps in. Did you ever look at the word and how it's spelled in English? Pastor Paul, I don't know how you would say it, but doubt in English is spelled how? D-O-U-B-T. Where did the B come from? Did you ever think about that? Well, think about stuff like that. You know where it came from? It came from another English word that means double. So doubt is double vision. Doubt is being double-minded. Doubt is trying to stand in two places at the same time. That's what it means. That's what doubt is. He said, why did you doubt? You had your gaze fixed on me. You were aligned with my abilities and you were walking on water and then you doubted and you went down. Do you understand that? He said, that's why Jesus said, why did you doubt? He says, you of little faith, you that have all these gaps in your faith. You see, when Peter had seamless faith, he was walking on water. Listen, they didn't make that up. He was walking on water. That seamless faith. And by the way, let me tell you something. You've got the Holy Spirit inside of you. The same abilities, not a different ability, not a lesser ability, not a, well, you can't walk on water, but I'll give you a rowboat and you can. No, the same abilities, folks. You know, greater works than these will he do also. Greater works than walking on water. That's part of a new possible that's available to everyone in this room. Everyone in this room. So I said, doubt is attempting to stand in two places, wavering, mixing two possibilities that cannot and will not mix. So what's the answer? Because we all doubt. We all get to that place to where we're thinking double about something. Double, we call it, Bible calls it double-mindedness. You know, a mixed heart. It's the same thing. What's the answer to this? I think we can find the answer in Hebrews chapter 12. The writer of Hebrew tells us quite frankly, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Fixing your eyes on Jesus. No double-mindedness, no doubt. Fixing your mind, aligning your faith with him. And as he said before, with man, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. Please stand with me.